Now, here's the big news that we're currently tracking. Was the hijab row a big manufactured protest? The High Court in Karnataka now, in a landmark order, has asked for a probe into this entire episode. Protests that, in fact, went on to take violent turns in several districts of Karnataka. Now, the Karnataka High Court saying that this entire episode or these violent protests must be probed into. Who instigated it? What really happened? Who are those backing these protests coming in from fringe elements? The High Court has said, and I quote, some unseen hands are at work to engineer social unrest and disharmony. The High Court has said that it is dismayed the way the hijab war was generated in the middle of examination time. High Court has said that it expects a speedy and effective investigation into this matter and wants culprits to be brought to book. Remember, we saw large-scale protests that took place in several parts of Karnataka where you had protests taking violent turns and fringe elements on both ends coming in large numbers demanding that their religious symbol must be allowed. It took a violent turn with stone pelting, several injuries that were reported to. And now the Karnataka High Court, even as it pronounced its verdict, also at the same time asking for a thorough investigation into these fringe elements and those hands backing these protests to create unrest and disharmony. This is the Karnataka High Court urging for a probe, a thorough probe, only to uncover those elements trying to disturb peace in the state. Nalini Sharma for more on that from Delhi. Nalini, you've been tracking the court's developments here. Karnataka High Court now, while in the same breath of pronouncing the verdict further, goes on to, in fact, highlighting the kind of violent turn these protests took, and now pushing for a thorough probe into really who are those people behind these protests that have created such unrest and disharmony. What more has the High Court observed?
Well, yes, Nabila, some very important observations have come in from this 126-page judgment that the High Court has pronounced, where they've gone ahead and said that they were dismayed as to how all of a sudden, that too in the middle of an academic term, the issue of hijab was blown and generated out of proportion to the powers to be. And in that regard, they've gone ahead and said that the way the entire situation unfolded gives scope for the argument that some unseen hands are at work to engineer social unrest and disharmony in the society. But in the same breath, the High Court's gone ahead and said that much is not necessary to specify and that they are not going to comment on the ongoing police investigation, but said that they expect a speedy and effective investigation into the matter and that the culprits who are responsible for creating the social unrest and disharmony in the society should be brought to book as early as possible. So it's coming in from the Karnataka High Court three-judge bench themselves that it perceives as though there are elements in the society, anti-social elements, that are actively working towards creating unrest in the society using this situation that erupted because of the hijab row, and it is the job of the police to ensure that this entire matter is investigated as early as possible.
You know, Nalini, we saw that right after the 6 girls petition, and they themselves protested outside. They were outrightly, in fact, there was this Campus Front of India had no qualms in declaring that they are entirely behind these girls, the petitioners who are protesting. And we saw those protests escalate with then again right-wing groups jumping in and them protesting for saffron shawls to be included inside classrooms. So we saw both ends, radical groups coming forward and taking center stage and fanning these protests to violent turns. But so far, really, no proper arrest has taken place. Detentions happened, but no proper arrest. No one really pinned with responsibility for fanning this violence, because many of them came from student wings and student organizations. They were probably pardoned and let go. Now with the Karnataka High Court saying that this must be probed thoroughly, do you think strict action will come about by the police?
Well, definitely, Nabila, because if you remember, even during the course of the hearing, the High Court had raised several questions regarding the credibility of the Campus Front of India itself. Because this was an assertion that was made by the government that it was the Campus Front of India and the college authorities. Remember, when the college argued before the Karnataka High Court, they said that there was no issue in the college until and unless representatives of the CFI had come and met the college authorities, who then incited the students to carry on these protests outside these educational institutions. So a lot of spotlight was on the Campus Front of India even during the course of the hearing. And now the Karnataka High Court, although they have not attributed any of the social unrest directly to the Campus Front of India, but keeping in mind the questions they had raised at that time, we can be rest assured that Campus Front of India might be a part of this investigation by the Karnataka police to find out as to whether or not they were playing a role in creating this social unrest, because assertions to the same effect have been made by the Karnataka government as well as the college authorities already before the Karnataka High Court. So this issue at the same time becomes much bigger than just as to whether or not students should be allowed to wear the hijab. It's also now become as to whether or not these students were actively being incited by an outside element during this entire scenario.
All right, Nalini, really appreciate your insight.